If you want to use the chat line, you might be able to add your own input into each of those dynamic systems. And then we can also discuss them live. So the dynamic systems approach comes from the work of Thielen and Smith. And one of the systems that they look at is environment and how that impacts on how an interaction takes place. When I mentioned to some colleagues that I would be doing this talk today, one of the parents reminded me that she has a great setup with her music therapist, and she can't go into the therapy session with her teenager, but she sits outside in an area where she can hear what's going on. And she has her iPhone or her iPad, and the music therapist has her smartwatch. And as the therapist is conducting the session, she might say something very casually like, "I'm wondering what sort of music you like." And the mother can type that in, and the music therapist receives it on her smartwatch. And it speeds the interaction up, and it makes for a better relationship and a better flow in the interaction. It's more fluid. I see from the questions on the attendance sheets that some people are asking about nervousness and stress in the AAC journey. And if you're an AAC user, I'm just wondering whether people have actually tried pre-programming their AAC device so that in the environment, it makes for, again, a more fluent interaction if there's a pre-programmed introduction, or maybe the use of an introduction card that you can give to people so that that alters the environment a little bit. You're giving them an add-on to your own self. There were also some questions about culture and how to deal with AAC use in a multicultural society. And I thought I just might share a little bit of information, which I now find humorous, but at the time I found infuriating, is that in my journey with disability, when my husband got his diagnosis, we had to go to a counsellor who was not from our culture. And I was reminded in that meeting that it was still my wifely duty to pick up his shirts when he dropped them on the floor. And as my husband said, he thought he did really well out of that counselling session because he doesn't drop his shirts, and I wouldn't dream of picking them up off the floor. So it really is useful if you can do some research before an interaction to allay any cultural hiccups that may happen in the process. The third dynamic is relationship, and that's an important one because some of us might be working as therapists, but also we have a dual role as parents or even grandparents. And I'm wondering from this group if anyone has that experience and how that impacts on emotionality, not only of the AAC journey, but of the family dynamics. Because parents were not always parents, and some parents have got therapy, education backgrounds, and that must surely impact on the relationships if the person is using AAC. The fourth dynamic is human agency, what makes us who we are, your being. And my advice there, especially in terms of stress, is to pace yourself and don't run on empty. And I mean there, don't run on empty energy, on empty knowledge, and empty motivation. So try and be very self-aware of what you're bringing emotionally, verbally and non-verbally to an interaction. And the last one is language, and the language that we use when we're interacting with family members, with other therapists, with people who use AAC. and caution not to use acronyms, but use plain English. You might like to try role playing with a spouse or family member and just seeing how soon it is before they say, I don't understand that word. I went for many years in my head talking about ATCs, adult training centers, to my husband, saying that I was off to an AAC. I had seen someone at an ATC. And one day he actually said, you know, I have to ask you, why do you go to air traffic control centers? Okay. So we take for granted sometimes that other people know the language that we're using. So does anyone at this point in time have any input into those 5 dynamic systems in terms of emotionality and the impact that can have on interactions? I'll leave you a few minutes just to have a look at those. Should we take the environment one first? Has anyone experienced anything that impacts on emotionality? I know, for example, one of my clients' parents reported that their little boy went to the hospital for most of his speech therapy appointments, and they both came away in tears because the medical model was being used so much. But when the therapist went and did the home visit, it changed the dynamic completely. And they saw the little boy in his own environment doing things that he had never done in all the weeks that he was making the hospital appointment. And the outcome was that he had a reduction in the number of session appointments that he had to make, because they now saw a completely different person in a completely different environment. Does anyone else share that?
I work in a hospital environment and I often see that as well. And that's why I think it's important of knowing your environment. And sometimes I'll say to the family that the child does need therapy, but this isn't the right environment for them. You know, that this, yes, the need is there, but this isn't the right fit, and try to, you know, refer them to the appropriate fit. So I think that's important. LJ, do you have a question? I keep seeing LJ's hand go up, so I want to make sure that, wasn't sure if he had a question or not.
My grandma and grandpa at the time did not understand I was talking during discipline. And like, you know, families should understand this is a time-limited thing to answer.
So time is also important, LJ. Yes. Have you ever seen or have you ever used introduction cards, which just might say, hi, I'm LJ, and I'd really appreciate you giving me some time, more time than you'd give maybe another person, so that I have a turn?
I have a button there.
So what is the button? Can you share with them what the button is?
Excuse me, I have something to say.
That's the button.
Excellent. Okay. Thanks, LJ.
Yeah.
It's useful to have that pre-programmed, isn't it? That's also one that's good for interrupting as well. If people are talking too fast around you and you can't get your words in. Someone's saying that they have encountered some resistance to AAC because the person doesn't want the grandchildren on an iPad all day. Yeah, that can be a perspective of AAC. It can be useful, I think, to make sure that they realize that AAC is light, low, and high, and that we need it in all different sorts of environments. And there are environments where you can't take the low or the high tech, maybe in wet areas. So making sure that people see the diverse range of AAC, and also aided and unaided as well. So if you're using your voice or you're using your gestures as well as other things, there's lots of different ways to use AAC, and that might lower the resistance.
And it looks like Mike has a question as well.
Sorry, Mike.
I see that in schools, if a family starts sending their child at 3. That. They are. Just. Doing. School. 4. Therapy. I see that in schools, if a family starts sending their child at 3, that they are just doing school for therapy.
So are you meaning that they're not getting enough educational curriculum, Mike, and it's mainly physio, speech, and OT? Yeah. That's a hard one, because there's so much early intervention that's needed in a development that sometimes it's really difficult to get that mesh between curriculum and therapy. So maybe in our relationships, in that relationships system, we need to be talking more and collaborating more, therapist, teacher, parent, so that the educational curriculum can come into the therapy activities.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even if it's counting and adding and subtracting when we're doing a physical exercise. Mm-hmm. It's a hard call, but I know some agencies are doing or trying to do that sort of thing. Thanks, Mike.
And also in the chat feature, some people have brought up that certain schools sometimes will recommend particular vocabulary for high-tech AAC devices because that's what's familiar to the district or familiar to the teacher, instead of really taking feature matching into approach and really looking at what was best fit for the child, not necessarily for the adults involved. So I thought that was interesting.
Yes, and I think very often there are people who become communication partners with AAC. I don't know if you AAC users find this, but the focus becomes high tech. Instead of remembering what AAC, augmentative communication, is all about. And even the act of conversation becomes more elusive because it's not multimodal. That's my perspective anyway.
No, I think often people forget that language and communication is everywhere and is truly total communication, and what that encompasses.
Yes. And once you've got that, then that relationship dynamic must surely improve, and you have more chance of achieving goals, I believe. Okay. Did anyone want to mention anything about the cultural system? And LJ, are you asking a question? Oh, lost you.
Families need to like talk about the student needs and like make a family and school relationship.
Yes, excellent. Well done, you. Yeah.
And I just saw in the chat, I think someone asked if you could repeat the question in regards to cultural.
Yes. Has anyone got any cultural anecdotes that reflect strategies that we should use when we are interacting with people as therapists, from a therapist perspective? Someone had raised the point of how would you interact with someone who was Vietnamese, for example. So my strategy reflects that don't run on empty approach. Take time, even if you have to delay the appointment, to do your research so that you don't risk wrecking the interaction through lack of knowledge. Does anyone want to add on that? Jamie? You're muted.
Sorry, I was like thinking, and then you said you called on me, so I can speak to that. I'm an SLP. I've worked in the schools, and I currently work in outpatient. And I've had a family who has primary communication partner is his mother, who speaks Spanish. His sisters spoke English and Spanish. So when we were looking for a funded device, we went with Unidad because it was the most appropriate one for him. I have another student whose family is from the Middle East. I can't remember exactly which country, so I apologize. But they didn't have a lot of expectations for him culturally. And so I had to be very careful with my Western mind thinking individualism, he has the important things to say, without wrecking the relationship with the family, because I wanted them to really trust me in helping him work with teachers and students together. I don't have as much of that right now in my outpatient, but it was something that I dealt with a lot in the schools.
So would it be fair to say, Jamie, that you have to rein yourself in as well and not sort of be excited for your cultural approach to be imposed on someone else? You've got to hold back and reflect on what their needs are.
I do, but I also think that's something that ethically we as therapists have to be, very mindful about, not just with AAC, but generally speaking with communication. So reining it in is more of a, I guess, cognitive therapeutic idea, where I think for us, we need to remember that we are the therapist, we are not the parent. And we need to remember that ultimately, those are the people that this child is going to be with the rest of his life. And that we need to take into account that relationship first.
Yeah, I always say to my families that I'm part of the team. I can provide information regarding communication, but ultimately they know their child, they know their family, and what works best for their family unit. So I think that's important as well.
Yes, I always say to the parents, you're the expert in your child. If you could let me share a little bit of your expertise with you, that may be helpful. Yeah.
Okay, LJ, do you have a question?
I wish AAC companies would branch out into other languages. I am turning 13 and going to have a bar mitzvah, and my device is awful at Hebrew.
Yeah. That's a really good point, because I often feel that way as well. So it's nice to hear from that from an AAC user. As a therapist, I have many children who come to me who speak many different languages. I'm in the DC area, and there's just such a lack of multiculturalism, especially in regards to languages available. And I think Mike's got a question now.
We don't have any good system for Asian and Native American, and that bugged me.
Do you think, Mike, that there's need for us to produce some sort of AAC document with YouTube or plain English hyperlinks in it?
Yeah,
Because I haven't seen anything in the AAC field that does that.
Yes.
Maybe there's someone out there who's about to do some research, and that might be a good research topic. It would seem to be something that we have had a need for, even with COVID. So, you know, a translation and a cultural awareness document for AAC wouldn't go misplaced right now. Okay. Has anyone got any input into the language dynamic? Has anyone got any experiences about the way they've been spoken to? I know you guys who are using AAC often talk about the stress of being in an interaction, particularly if people don't allow you time. But how about the way someone talks? Maybe they use parentese, or the one that really niggles me is, how are we today? Rather than how are you today?
L. Language. Is. Terrible.
yeah,
When. You are. Speaking. 2. A. 3. 0. 1. 3. Baby language is terrible when you are speaking to a 13.
Totally agree. And it makes me wonder whether I'm not an AAC user, but whether people have ever thought, who are AAC users, that there's need for a button on your device for that one as well. You know, you don't have to talk to me like a baby. I understand every word you say. Because things aren't going to change unless the other person makes it change. Okay, as well. It's just an idea.
Acronyms are hard because my device doesn't pronounce it properly.
Ah, I had the same problem recently programming a device too. We had to really change the way it was spoken in order to get it to sound back reasonable. Well, that's some food for thought. So could we move on to the questions and see what people can input onto those questions? Because the first one is, how do we respond to stressed individuals? And when I'm working with people who are stressed, I know that stress often stops me listening. I hear people, but I don't listen to them. So I actually prefer people to write down keywords. Not write down what they're saying, but just to write down keywords and then maybe link them up so that I get a visual approach to the information they're trying to give me.
A. Minute. Superb. To breathe. Take a minute to breathe.
Yes. I don't know whether anyone works, excuse me, with people who have that breathing, technique, they try to breathe. But if you start trying to breathe, you often find your shoulders go up. So I remind people soft tummy, because the moment you make a soft tummy, your shoulders come down. And then you're more likely to be able to get a decent breath rather than deep breath and everything tenses up. Yeah. So I saw an article recently that 4 different
We
types.
teach breathing so the stressed person can calm themselves down.
Yes. Yeah. But I'm understanding that there are different sorts of breathing, LJ. So we have to be careful sometimes when we're cueing the person to breathe or even modeling it for them. So if I take a breath, maybe other people will take a breath. I know if I'm in a room with physios, I often find myself sitting up taller just because they seem to model that. So maybe as therapists, we could model some of those things. Sorry, Mike. Or is it LJ? Sorry, LJ.
About journal. Journaling. What do you think about journaling?
Journaling? Yeah. I'm not sure. I don't know that word. Tell me more.
Writing.
Do you mean like a brag book or a diary?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I think it's an excellent idea. I belong to a lot of groups that have music therapy, and they write their own songs and then put that song to music. And that's another form of self-expression. Now, I noticed someone has said, oh, it keeps jumping around. What I noticed is that therapists doesn't like to expose AAC users to all the words, but limit the words they're exposed to. And I would agree there. I had a grandmother tell me only last week, you talk to him, and him was 6 years old, just like he understands everything. And that is so difficult to explain sometimes and change the emotionality of the AAC journey for that relationship between grandmother and grandson. Okay. But again, I think it comes down to information about what communication is and what AAC is and what the disability is. Not being able to speak doesn't mean you have nothing to say. If you can't speak, you can still feel and you do understand. Okay. What else have we got here? Yes, once we're calm, then going back to naming how we felt, because when you're so stressed, you often can't get the words out and you can't get the right feelings. I saw a new app yesterday called Rainbow of Feelings. And instead of the 4 zones of regulation, it had the rainbow colors, and you could actually match the emotion to the different colors and then give text to describe what you'd like to do under those situations. So it was an informative card-based system. Okay. Okay, so I would gather that breathing and journaling are a couple of the main strategies that we would use for responding to stressed individuals. Is anyone in the group old enough to remember that when social workers seem to do an awful lot of, you know, the dialogue and the chat around emotional issues and feelings and stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. I'm glad I'm not the only old one here. I don't know if that's your Auslan, that's our Auslan sign for old. I don't know what the American one is, but it does make me feel very old when I was working in teams for many, many years where the social worker was the lead figure there. And I don't see social workers so much in teams. I think we've just come away from maybe the medical model so much, and social workers are just not doing the same thing that they used to do. So who is, and does that mean that we have to try and look at, yeah, we have to look at cross-discipline skill development? Any comments on that one? Jamie?
I actually do. Because I think in the US, we have really created this chasm between the medical and educational models for speech therapy. And it's really hard to cross-discipline and communicate with each other. And then you add an outside therapist like an ABA that have the child for almost as much time as the school does. And you're trying to do best practice, but sometimes it gets lost. And so you have to hear what the parent has said. Well, the ABA therapist wants me to do this, and try to, in the best possible way, match whatever was told without devaluing the other professional in the room, and also adding in what we know to be true. So I don't know how it is in the land of Oz, but it's very difficult, and we don't have social workers in the outpatient therapy to support it. And there's very little funding in the schools for social workers. It's starting up again, but it isn't there. So that is not something that we usually get here.
No, I think it's very similar here. And we also have the community-based speech therapists as well. So I just think it's more that is put on us, but maybe we don't have access to the means to improve our skills. And should we improve our skills is the other part of that question.
Yeah, I think it's definitely in the US, it's something that we as clinicians need to improve our skill sets, but unfortunately we're often being asked to improve our skill sets on a lot of things. So I know myself that I'm often felt like I'm being pulled in too many different situations. I work in the medical model, and what we're finding is social work is not being paid for by insurance companies, and everything is about productivity and billable units. So if it's not billable, it's not occurring. So unfortunately, a lot falls upon the clinicians. And I think especially more well-rounded and older clinicians who have learned the need to include emotional and social emotional skills into their practices. That's definitely something that's not kind of taught to us in graduate school. I think just with experience, we see that there's a need for it. Okay, Mike has a comment, sorry.
Does. Psychologist. slash S O social W O work worker understand the field. Plus, does psychologist slash social worker understand the field?
I think the big question there, Mike, is which field? Is it disability field? Is it AAC field? Is it any of those dynamic systems? Is it outcomes? You know, it's such a really, really big area, AAC. And I suspect that no one is getting the foundation skill knowledge to build up from. When Jennifer was talking about, you know, the experience that we bring over time to this, why I'm interested is I'm only finding now that it's personal experiences as a grandparent in that coming into this communication and disability sector, that I'm finding, wow, the emotionality behind all this, dealing with issues, and who do you talk to? And then how do you judge whether this speech therapist is the one you should see, this OT is the one you should see, this psychologist is the one you should see? I find that I'm looking for age, experience, and lived in experience, I think, to help me make that journey in AAC smoother. And that sometimes the barriers that face someone who's a therapist with a dual role, that can actually not be helpful. Okay, now I know that's not true for everyone, but it is huge. And I'm hoping that, you know, through groups like this, where this is transdisciplinary, and there are people from lots of different walks of life, that things may improve at a faster rate. And I'm from the group of people where I was not allowed to train parents to be communication partners to a level where they could train others. Support workers that I worked with for people with disability were not allowed to go into advanced. We had basic, advanced instructor training. They didn't need that information. I've had people from a university walk out of one of my workshops when we did alternative options for families. And it might include Feldenkrais, massage therapy, whatever. We just did the whole gambit and walked out in disgust because we were sharing that information with parents. So things have changed, but we've still got a long way to go. Okay, so that really got us into who were parents before they were parents. And it probably got us to the last bit that I wrote for myself there, which is walk the talk. So trying to get some lived in experience. So the fourth question there, we need to be more mindful of how to translate our professional jargon into meaningful language. And I saw that quite a few people had commented on that one when we were talking about the dynamic systems. And people were talking about, Stephanie, you said, I recently spoke with a mother who corrected me because I kept saying, "What do you think, Mom?" She reminded me that I needed to refer to her by her name and not call her Mum. Whoops. Okay. All right. and also for people to talk as if they were talking to any other person. And the thing that what happens when you talk to another person is that if they don't understand, if you've said something that they didn't connect with, they will stop you and they will say, hey, hang on a minute, what do you mean by that? So we have to be sure that users of AAC actually have that repair strategy and that clarification strategy built into their device. Agree? Any comments? Because we're looking at ultimately symmetrical conversations, symmetrical interactions. And I think too, when we're talking to families or other disciplines, then we say, hey, listen, I get so used to using my own professional jargon. Don't hesitate to stop me if I say something that you're not clear on. And I think the most embarrassing thing for me was when I worked for government and it was suggested that I move to policy as well, because they were getting rid of all the therapists. Okay, we were restructuring. And I went to a how to do policy, how to write policy. And what we had to do in that workshop was describe ourselves, say our name and what we did. And the moment anyone in the audience, and they were from every discipline under the sun, I would think, whenever anyone didn't understand you, they had to raise their hand. They told you what they didn't understand and you sat down and you never got to go any further. And all I said was, I'm Jane Remington-Gurney and I work in augmentative and alternative communication. Hand went up. Okay. So it just showed to me that I don't start myself like that. I just work helping people to communicate using methods other than speech. This is often known as, okay. So again, when we're looking at that relationship dynamic, maybe that's a strategy that we need to do. Don't introduce the fancy word first, give the definition first and then the label. Because often if you give that label and people don't understand it, they've stopped hearing then because they're still thinking about that word. So this is why I talk about do some role plays. Okay. Right, what have we got in the chat line? Okay, Rocky, it's always non-AAC users that are training and teaching, but having AAC users explain and help others understand would have more impact. Yes, and in addition, we actually have that sort of program here in Brisbane, and it's a big success where we are having AAC users. And when I did work for government, we would pay the user of AAC to train the staff, all right? Rather than them be, as they say, I felt like a fish in a fishbowl or a guinea pig. So it was a paid operation. In the research articles that I was looking at, I think there will be one of those in the hyperlinks for you in the handouts. There was an article where they were talking about sharing information to parents who had autism was received better if it was coming from a person with autism rather than themselves. So, you know, it's not just AAC users. I think that may be something that's relevant across a number of disability fields or neurodiversity fields. Okay, what about police and folks like them not recognizing or understanding assistive technology? I don't know what you have in the US, but here we have AAC expert specialists in AAC going into police academy training. And that happens for autism as well. No?
I think we're starting to see that for autism. But I see Jamie has her hand up, so she might have more to fill in, but I haven't previously heard of anything like that besides autism training in this country. But Jamie.
So I know that in Prince William County in Virginia, they do have training, not just for autism, but all kinds of mental health illness. The most recent things that have been happening in the United States have put more pressure on police departments to make sure that they demonstrate that police officers have that training. And I have friends who are police officers all over the country, and they usually have some kind of training. It's very minimal, but it's some training. Now with AAC, I've not heard as much about it. So
I do know that a colleague of mine, Matt Wilson, he was going into the police academy here and doing AAC training so that people would be more aware of the alternatives to communication that might be offered. Yeah. Okay.
We gave our local school system low tech versions of the symbols so that they would have a laminated version and they could keep it in the trunk of their police car so that if they had to, make a stop and they came in contact with someone who is non-speaking, that they would be able to at least present that and perhaps they would recognize some of the symbols.
Yes. Yes. So again, it's almost like that education at a foundation level to whet the appetite to go further, rather than, I think, keep fixating on specific AAC methods and tools. There is always that need for the foundation level awareness.
I also have seen a card that was for an EMT, which was all of the pictures of all of the body parts, like what's hurting, what's wrong.
Ooh,
Yeah.
okay.
Can you tell me what EMT is?
Like an ambulance, an emergency medical team.
Okay, right. Okay, right.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yes, yes. Yeah, you jogged my memory too. Yes, yeah, we've done that. Okay. So maybe then there is a need in our the training that we give. And I know someone asked for the difference between training and coaching. So when we train people in AAC, or we create greater awareness in AAC, maybe asking them to create a core vocabulary display, a core vocabulary gesture system or whatever, that is discipline specific, may be very helpful. Yeah. I just want to pick up on this comment about autism. I think, do you remember I mentioned earlier about we have to create change ourselves, and by putting this information out there, by interrupting people and saying, hey, hang on, it's not we, how are we today? You're asking me how I am. So could you please say, how are you? That's a helpful thing to do. And you'll feel that I also revert to a lot of social story language. So that's a helpful thing to do. That's a polite thing to do. That's a friendly thing to do. Okay. I think the awareness in autism has been so much greater because of the advocacy within that, the heroes within that field. And maybe we need to mirror that. So that is, yeah, okay. That's just a little niggle that I have. Okay. AAC is not high tech alone. Okay. And the field of complex communication needs is not autism alone. All right.
Someone just put into the chat message asking for some ideas regarding a middle school, a child who's an AAC user who's going into middle school, who's a little hesitant to use his device in public. I didn't know if the group might have some suggestions for this patient, for this child.
Well, the first, Mike, are you answering there?
Yeah.
Sorry, I won't interrupt. Yeah.
J. T. E. M. A. Email. A. D. D. Address. So. They can. Talk. 2. 1. Another. Get TJ email address so they can talk to one another.
Yep. Yep. Thanks, Mike. I would strongly suggest that they talk to the user and ask what they are finding the most challenging thing. Is it, heaven forbid, that they are female and the voice on their machine is male? All right, or vice versa. Have they got the right voice? Have they got repair strategies? What part of the interaction causes the most challenges? And then could those challenges be role played?
Yes. There.
All right.
V. Voice. A. G. Age. A. P. P. Approve. Is their voice age approve? Why?
Exactly. Yeah.
Year. Years ago. When. I was. Starting. Out. They had. 2. Men. V. Voice. Voices. And. Two. Women. V. Voice. Voices. And. They were all terrible. Is their voice age approved? Years ago, when I was starting out, they had 2 men voices and 2 women voices, and they were all terrible.
All I can say is I know that it's improving, but it's slow, and we have to keep getting the feedback back to the designers. It's that last question coming up. It's collaboration. How do we collaborate?
Yeah. And I think the feedback continuing to come from the AAC users as well, because they will be the power of change. I think so. It's really important that you guys keep pushing and letting the developers know you're not happy, because that's how change happens. Sorry.
And maybe one day, Mike, it might be possible to have an AAC designer representative in this group. And the topic could be, how do you design, create voices for users of AAC?
I will also share or speak for LJ, if it's okay, Matt. When his device needs to get repaired, it's really frustrating that the voice that he typically has is temporarily unavailable because he has a loaner or a backup device. It totally changes the nuance and the tempo and every single thing about his personality and characteristics.
Yeah. I always say the backups have got to be, low tech, light tech, aided and unaided. It has to be across it. And I have been criticized for that, in that the communication is messy, was the word used. But, when you can sign, when you can gesture, those are words that perhaps don't fit normally onto or easily onto an aided system.
That shouldn't be.
I know it shouldn't be.
This is an amazing conversation. Unfortunately, we're starting to run out of time.
But I think the collaboration has been great, and the possibilities for future collaboration have been mentioned. So I'm very, very grateful to you guys and very happy to have been part of this group. And I thank you all very, very much for your input.
Well, thank you for all of us. And if anyone has any further suggestions for upcoming fireside chats, feel free to email me or Tana. I see LJ.
Oh, is that to Jennifer, though?
I think that's to you, to all of us.
Jennifer was talking, LJ, so I just wondered about the timing of that.
It's for you, Dr. Remington-Gurney.
I've got my Bonnie therapy dog here today, but maybe another time when we meet, she'll come in. Okay. But thank you very much.
Does anyone have any last minute questions or concerns? I think.
Okay.
Well, Dr. Jane, thank you again. I think this is something we could easily go on for many more hours. So I really appreciate this
today or this evening. Okay.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye. Good night, everyone.